Okay, good day. We're talking about business risk and assessment planning. I'm John Wolf. So let's talk about what we're going to cover today. So, firstly, key risk areas. Secondly, risk matrix, how to assess the risk level and the impact of that. And then, thirdly, key disciplines when it comes to risk management. What are some of the things that you need to think about when you're thinking about risk and how you actually manage that? So key risk areas. So whatever the risk is that may impact your business, it'll fit into 5 of 1 areas. So financial, environment, legal, technology, operational. So those are sort of the 5 areas. So for example, if you have an HR issue, it might fall within the legal realm. It might also be operational, depending on, I guess, what it is. But all of the risks that you will experience in a business will fit in one of those. Now, I want to talk about financial. So you'll see here we talk about direct risks. So those are risks that will directly impact your business. There are others indirect, which may or may not, depending on what kind of business you are. So for example, in financial, if you're from an exchange rate point of view, if you're an importer, absolutely that might be a direct risk for you. But for example, if you're a transport company and you buy a lot of fuel, potentially that could impact as well around exchange rates. So it just depends. So direct risk impacting directly. So let's go through that financial. So obviously cash flow, having sufficient cash flow, really, really important. That's a direct risk. Bad debts as well. The impact from a bad debt could be substantial. Financial model sustainability, so how your business is set up, what you're selling, how you're selling it, what your margins are, what your costs are, and what it costs you to deliver. Margins and compressions, so compression of the margin. So for example, if you sell a service or a product for $100 and it costs you $50 to produce or deliver that, if that cost goes up to $70, that means your margin is less and your margin is being compressed. Overhead burden, so these are all your fixed costs around doing business on your profit and loss. That's also a direct risk that potentially goes up. So one of the things that never goes down, well, I've never really seen it go down, is your work cover premiums, for example, which is inexpensive. So again, overhead burden. Wages, I haven't seen wages go the other way either. That normally just goes up. And then, of course, supplier risk. So if you've got a few suppliers or one supplier that supplies core components for you, obviously direct risk from them increasing their prices or something happening to them that you can't get the goods that you need. Those are examples of direct risk. Indirect, price wars and competition. So definitely something that you need to think about. The ability to pass on cost increases. So every year you get increases, you get that letter from your suppliers saying, hey, cost of this has gone up, the cost of that's gone up, but you're not always able to pass that on directly to your customers. Exchange rate we spoke about, and then inflation, of course, obviously indirect risk there. Interest rate, same thing. And access to capital. We saw that, I think during COVID time, it was really hard to get access to finance. During COVID, same issue, so definitely an indirect risk. Then if I jump across to operational, so direct risk there, customer service. If your customer service isn't great, or there's an impact there, they could go to competitors. Turnaround times and responsiveness, whether that's customer queries, whether that's customer jobs, whether that's customer complaints or issues, how quickly you deal with that. Processes and procedures not followed around operational areas, from when you actually start with the customer right through to when you deliver or you deliver the goods. Structure and management might not be adequate. Key staff risk, also a big one. You might rely on certain key staff members. So if they're not there or they move on or whatever, that's definitely a direct risk. Insured risk. also. Then compliance, obviously, and statutory obligations. So compliance, again, anything linked right through from work health and safety right through to the ATO, tax-wise, whatever. Indirect risks, obviously lack of clear position descriptions and performance management within the business, lack of structure and appropriately structured meetings, whether it's a toolbox meeting or a management meeting, definitely a risk there. Technology, direct risks, manual processes versus competitors' automation and digitization, that definitely is a risk. One of the things about technology, you can develop that under the radar, and the next thing tomorrow, your competitors suddenly got a new product or they deal with their customers in a different way. Lack of embedded operating systems, lack of or embedded operating systems expert risk. So in other words, you don't have the skills within the business, or you have someone and only one person, for example. So that's also a risk. Redundancy and data protection when it comes to technology. Legacy and non-integrated systems. We're really great at, I guess, using systems in the business and just adding systems to it, adding on. But then also the one system, how often have you experienced, I wish I had one system that did everything, because the one doesn't talk to the other. So again, that's also a risk. Lack of reporting and critical data analysis. This is really important when it comes to finance, but also just operationally. Any of those reports there, and it might be as simple as analysing leave, making sure that leave, that's taken when it needs to be, managing that risk as well. Lack of innovation and current trend research. You're so buried in the business working on it or in it that you don't work on it. So also from a technology point of view, a risk. Indirect, lack of future capex, so capital expenditure and planning for upgrading and improving your technology. Customer retention due to technology advances and offerings from other competitors which you can't match. So jumping to legal, so direct risk, there's a few employment law changes that are coming later in the year. Closing the loophole changes. There's been a raft of changes across, the past couple of years around that. Underpayment of wages, intellectual property risk, work cover risk, director ASIC risk. Obviously, the changes around director ID, you need to have that so they can track you from an ASIC point of view, but also that personal liability around superannuation payment and those type of things. Indirect risk, obviously product risk, and then customer dispute and retention risk. Environmental, natural disasters, power outages, risks that are not insurable, downtime and delayed production due to that, or assembly or customer job execution as a result of environmental factors, perishable goods, if that applies. Indirect risk, the ability to trade, cash flow buffer, when everything comes to a stop, what happens to that cash flow buffer if I'm not open and trading? Stock contamination, access to my workplace, business, and the ability to trade. So obviously these are not exhaustive, these lists. These are sort of a start to give you some idea of some of the direct risks that may or may not apply, and indirect risks. So it's kind of more a prompt than an absolute list. Okay, so let's say you've done your direct and indirect risk for your own business and highlighted what those are. What do I do with them? So I guess you need to look at a risk matrix, and this is about assessing the likelihood of that risk eventuating, and then also assessing the potential of that actual risk, the level of disruption that will create. And then you create a heat map, which has some nice colors to identify the high risk areas. So for example, what you will see, we spoke about likelihood. So likelihood ranges from very likely, so that's almost certain, right down to it's pretty rare that it would happen. And so, very likely, possible, unlikely, rare. It gives some idea of a definition. And so we wouldn't know exactly what your business is, but for example, it will give you an idea of what that looks like. So for example, on very likely, pretty much going to happen, event could happen at any time, and it could occur on a daily occurrence, for example, around likelihood. Versus on the other end of the scale, rare, the event may occur in exceptional circumstances, and the event may occur once every 1 to 2 years. Might be different in your case, might be 5 years, just depends. So that's, I guess, on the left-hand side around likelihood of the matrix. Then on the other side, consequences, it ranges from catastrophic impact right down to insignificant. So for example, if we look, maybe it's very likely, so it's at A on the left-hand side around likelihood, but if it does happen, it's insignificant. No significant impact on service delivery, little or no impact on it either. So for example, that level would fall where you can see on the heat map around the green areas. So those which are catastrophic, major and moderate, obviously at very likely, and possible, for the most part, those are red. So that's really high impact. If that happened, and it's very likely to occur, the impact is obviously much larger. So what's really important is you need to make sure that for those that specific to your business are in that red and orange range, not the yellow and green so much. I'm not saying discard that, but really important, you need to have some kind of action plans and what you would do when that event or those issues occur. All right, so what are some of the key disciplines when it comes to risk management? I cannot overstress this more than communicate. Your staff all need to be on the same page as to what's important, what are risks. What are some of these risks that are really an issue for your business that could impact? They need to understand that as well. Documenting your plans, and look, it doesn't have to be a 20-page document, but it does need to be a few pages. Think about a new staff member starting and they've got no idea what the risks are in your business, and if it occurs, whether there's something they need to do or if it is important or not. Regular review of your plans, so definitely at least 6 months to 12 monthly, need to have a look at that. A one-page, a quick reference. One of the things that always astounds me in all the businesses that we walk through, the one part that we do really well is we'll show them, if there's a fire, here's the map, you know where to go, right? But around the key risks, there's nothing up. You might have obviously your work health and safety poster and how to report your injuries and those type of things. But when it comes to the other issues, it's not visible. So 1 page is a quick reference, really important, also for new staff and induction. Discuss risk at every staff meeting, especially where stuff has happened or, there's potential for stuff to happen. Talk about that. Make your risk documents easily accessible, not hidden away. Everybody knows where to find them, what to do. Create an open channel to raise risk. Like if someone thinks there's an issue, they can raise it. Rather manage that and deal with that. Post-risk event, any issues that have happened, sit down and talk through that. Assess, how did we go? How did we manage that? Debrief on that. What do we need to change? Are there any key steps that we missed, for example? Really important. Don't leave it to chance. Manage your risks proactively. So, any questions?
Thank you, John. I think this is a very, very good topic for every business to consider, and it sort of like begs the question, is it recommended that you have an independent person helping you build that risk model? Because if you're a business owner and you're emotionally attached to your business, would you really consider every possible risk and be pragmatic about accepting it, that it could and it would, despite the worry that, how am I going to deal with it? So I think, do you believe that the best way to do it is to have someone independent help you with that?
Great question. There's no doubt, when you're close to a business, you would view risk differently from, someone independent. I think certainly you could start with your own assessment. Um, and I think two things. One, asking your staff, because they on the ground. Often if you're an entrepreneur or business owner, you're not in the thick of it. You might be on the tools or you might be behind the counter, but you might not be. Or you might have been a long time ago, so you don't really know what the issues are that you deal with. But I agree, someone totally independent that, is not part of the business, that would certainly be a sanity check. So yeah, I definitely would do that.
Thank you. And the other question is, when you actually try, once you've identified the risk and you profile them in terms of low, medium, high, and the likelihood of it happening and the impact, I guess having a mitigation plan is key because it helps you react straight away. But I guess the mitigation plan has to be so, I guess, bold, which includes options like merger, acquisition, partnership, divestiture, folding down. So I think that, transparency and honesty about the mitigation plan is going to be key. Um, have you been, or do you have examples where, um, you had challenges, making sure that the business owner accept those risks and the mitigation?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think you will be challenged the most with someone that's an entrepreneur because they're very optimistic around what it could look like. Yeah, we had an example with a particular business where the owner just didn't see the danger around long-term survival, and it actually got to a point where they didn't survive, which was sad. But I guess those early warning signs, yeah, you need to listen to the advice, and it's difficult to manage, but certainly it does happen, and we have experienced that. With our involvement, I think they survived for longer. Um, but yeah, I think if they listened to key advice, yeah, it would have potentially changed the outcome.
Yeah, that's a good point, but I think poor risk management costs money.
Yeah.
And I think that's the ultimate sacrifice as a small business you do not want to make. And especially working in the trade, you have a start to finish. And even in the banking industry, when we used to do risk management, it starts off right at the beginning, dealing with your client, right at the point where you complete a job or a function or a role.
Just going to touch on, small businesses, they're often time poor, and is this risk management, oh, do I really need to do it? I'll push it aside. And I mean, I think what you've been saying is that it's important to do and not push to aside. So as a small business owner, how can I get it onto my priority list of everything that I need to achieve?
It's a great question. I think I alluded to it in the presentation. I think in all of your meetings, whether it's a management meeting, toolbox meeting, staff meeting, whatever meeting that looks, executive meeting, whatever that looks like, it needs to be part of the agenda. And just talking about it and discussing it, I think will be the key part and the start of the journey. Because I agree, it's like, oh, it's not my priority at the moment. But again, it'll become your priority if it happens. So I think talking about it, I think the culture of discussing that, I think that your staff know that, that's important to you, managing that risk, because again, you got to think about it. There's risk to customers, there's risk to employees. If you look at it from that angle, I guess then it becomes easier to manage and be top of mind.
I guess one final question is, obviously you don't want to be overwhelmed about your risk management because you want to move on and manage your core business and look after your customers. So how can you make risk management everybody's business? And how often do you need to revisit your risk management plan?
Yeah, great question. I think if you give someone a part to play, so you say to them, hey, your role is to look after this particular section of risk. So in other words, let's talk about financial. So who looks after the financial risk? So yes, ultimately as a business owner, you carry the financial risks, but whether if you have a CFO or you have accounts manager, whoever looks after your finances, that's delegated to them, because they can then raise that, to your, I guess, to your level if there are some issues that occur. So I think that's probably a way to deal with it. Delegate that. Oh, how often? I think at least 6 monthly to annually. Once you've set it in place, I think the other time that you would review it in a different time span would be if something happens, when you then do the post event review.
As you navigate the complexities of running your small business, we want you to know that we are by your side. At Business Solutions Hub, we offer a dedicated team of HR, workplace relations, and business specialists. Whether you need tailored advice or strategic insights, we're here to assist you every step of the way. If you have any questions or need further assistance, call us on 1300 445 687